There are moments in life that leave you unable to understand, paralyzed with fear, moments when you feel that you are not alone, that someone is watching you in the dark. But, what if it wasn't just a feeling? Michael didn't believe in ghosts, he didn't believe in scary stories, but tonight, he was going to live one himself. Hold your breath, because this story will stay with you for a long time. The dark child on a cold, quiet night in New York, Michael was sitting in his home office, staring at his computer screen, an eerie silence enveloping the place. Everything was normal, until he looked out his window. There, in the middle of the dark street, stood a small child, motionless. He was wearing old clothes, suspiciously clean, but strange, as if they didn't belong in this era. But what was even stranger, his features were not clear. The darkness seemed to swallow his face completely, as if the child was nothing more than a shadow. Michael felt a cold shiver run through his body. Why was this child standing here at this late hour? There was no one else on the street, not even the sound of a passing car or a distant noise, just the heavy silence. Michael stood for a moment, he hesitated, then decided to move. There must be something wrong, maybe the child is lost. Maybe he needs help. He quickly got up from his chair, and headed to the door. He opened it slowly and stepped out into the street, but suddenly stopped. The child disappeared. He looked around in all directions, but the street was completely empty. No sound, no movement, just darkness and a heavy silence suffocating the place. And suddenly, "I don't like rain." A faint whisper, but it was clear. It was right behind him. Michael froze in place, his breath chasing him, his heart beating madly. He turned very slowly. And there was the child. Standing next to him, closer than he should have been, without any movement. This time, he saw his eyes clearly. They weren't human. They glowed a faint yellow, as if they were looking at something that no one else could see. Michael was startled and stepped back, ran towards the house and quickly closed the door. He tried to calm his breathing, but something wasn't right. The same feeling was still there. As if someone was watching him, from inside this time. He slowly lifted his head, and looked at the mirror. And he saw him. The child was standing behind him, inside the house. Since that night, Michael never saw the child again. But every night, when it was pitch dark, he heard a soft whisper in his ear. "I don't like rain. What about you? Do you like rain? What if you were Michael? What would you do?" The story of the Bavarian family, the 85-year crime in a quiet village in the German state of Bavaria. The Gruber family lived a normal life in their isolated country house. No one expected that this family would turn into a terrifying mystery that has baffled investigators for more than 85 years. The story began 6 months before the crime occurred, when the maid who worked in the family's house began hearing strange noises. There was a light knock on the windows, whispers echoing in the hallways, and footsteps moving in the dark. The maid tried to tell the family, but they did not believe her. They considered it all just hallucinations. But she was sure of what she was hearing. Something was lurking in the dark. She could not take it anymore. So she left work and ran away. The house remained silent, until one day before the crime. The family decided to bring in a new maid to replace the previous one, but on the same day she arrived, the real horror began. The scary signs at night, the family began hearing the same noises that the previous maid had talked about. But this time, it wasn't just noises. The father, Andreas Gruber, found a newspaper on the ground. No one in the family had bought it. The keys to the storeroom had disappeared without a trace. But the most terrifying thing was what Andreas found the next morning. Mysterious footprints in the snow, coming from the nearby forest, headed straight towards the house. But they weren't footprints, only footprints. Someone, or something, had entered the house, and didn't come out. The family was terrified, but Andreas refused to pick up a weapon, despite the warnings of his neighbor and the farm worker. He didn't know that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The night of terror, and the massacre on the night of March 31st, 1922, the nightmare began. A murderer was hiding inside the house, waiting for the right moment to carry out his crime. One by one, the family members were lured into the barn. There, the murderer was waiting for them. The father, mother, daughter and little granddaughter were brutally killed on the head. There was no screaming, no resistance. It was as if they had walked to death on their own 2 feet without realizing it. As for the new maid and the baby, they did not survive either. But the killer did not take them to the barn, but killed them inside the house. But here lies the most terrifying part of the case. The killer did not escape after the crime. The killer who lived with the corpses. The crime was not discovered until 5 days later, but during these days, smoke came out of the fireplace every night, and the animals were fed as if someone was taking care of them. This means that the killer remained in the house for several days after the crime was committed, living among the corpses, eating and drinking, as if he were one of the family. There was no trace of the killer, and the murder weapon was not found. The investigation continued for years, and dozens of suspects were interrogated, including the neighbor Lawrence who discovered the crime. But he was not the killer. In 2007, after 85 years of searching, the case was finally closed without knowing who the killer was and why he committed the crime. Conclusion: the family home remained abandoned for decades, turning into a terrifying legend in Germany. Some say that the killer was not a human being, but something else, something that lived in the shadows waiting for the right moment to pounce on the family. What do you think? Do you think this crime could have been the work of an ordinary person? Or is there a scary secret that has not yet been revealed? Red circle if you dare. Tell us in the comments, have you ever heard strange noises in your home? This is the story of a family that disappeared completely under mysterious circumstances, and only one person survived, but he came out with a shattered mind, unable to explain what he saw. This is the story of a family that faced a living nightmare, inside a house that was not supposed to exist in the first place. The beginning, the deadly camping trip. One spring day, a family of 5 decided to take a camping trip to an enchanted forest near Route 56, an old road known to be neglected and rarely traveled. The father was an adventure lover, the mother was excited about a new experience, and the 3 children, Jack, 19 years old, Dora, 15 years old, and Sam, 9 years old, were excited to spend some time in nature. At first, everything seemed perfect: clear skies, giant trees, fresh air. Nothing to worry about, until the second day. That day, the family decided to explore deep into the forest, unaware that they were about to enter the point of no return. As time passed, no one noticed that the sun was starting to set, and darkness was slowly creeping through the trees. Suddenly, the mother tripped and fell hard, causing an injury that made her unable to walk quickly. It was getting dark, and the forest no longer looked as magical as it did during the day. It had become eerie, and unnaturally silent. They had to find shelter until the mother's condition improved. While they were searching, Dora saw a faint light coming out of the trees in the distance. It was an abandoned house, in the middle of the forest. The house that shouldn't be opened. The house looked old, but it wasn't dilapidated. The strange thing was that it was lit up, as if someone lived in it. Jack knocked on the door. He waited. But no one answered. As they were about to leave, the door opened by itself, terrifyingly slowly, as if inviting them to come in. They decided to go in to look for help. But the house was completely empty of residents, even though it was tidy, clean, and the lights were working normally. But the question was, where did the owners of the house go? While they were looking for someone to help them, the family noticed something strange. Dora wasn't with them. She disappeared completely without anyone hearing a sound. Everyone started looking for her everywhere inside the house, but there was no trace of her. The father decided to go outside to search, and while he was inspecting the place, he noticed a strange small door in the wall of the house that was half open as if someone had passed through it. The father approached cautiously, and when he touched the door, a huge, black, bloody hand came out of it and pulled him forcefully inside. He didn't even have time to scream, and he disappeared as if he had never existed. Inside the house, Jack and Sam heard a sudden scream from the ground floor. It was the mother's scream. They ran towards the sound, but what they saw was a living nightmare. The mother was split in half, and blood covered the floor and walls. Jack fell to his knees, screaming, unable to believe what he was seeing, while Sam couldn't control himself, and ran out of the house in a state of hysteria. Jack, who couldn't leave the place without searching for his father and sister, decided to stay and search, but he found nothing but deadly silence. Outside, Sam was running unconsciously, but he didn't know that something was watching him. The next morning, as Jack was walking away from the house towards the police, he saw a scene that made his blood freeze in his veins. Sam's head was hanging from a tree. Jack couldn't scream, he couldn't cry, he just kept going. Jack got to the police and told them everything that had happened. But when the officers returned with him to the house, there was no trace of him. It was as if the house had never existed. The police searched everywhere, but no trace of the family was found, not the father, not the mother, not Dora, not even the remains of Sam. In the end, the police thought that Jack had suffered severe psychological trauma and sent him to a mental institution, where he kept repeating the same words for years. The house opened the door by itself. "Dora, where is Dora?" A black hand took my father. I saw Sam's head on top of the tree. Today, Route 56 still exists, but it's a deserted road, forbidden to enter. There are rumors that people have entered that forest, and never came out. As for you, the question is, do you dare enter a forest from which you may never return? Fearful face.